Welcome back to part 2 of our look at the Treaty of Versailles. Now, last time we left you had a look at the goals of the French leader moving into the Treaty of Versailles. So this is where Clemenceau is coming from. Let's now take a look at the British point of view. So here's the British Prime Minister, Lloyd George, and what are his goals? What are his, things that are driving what it is that he wants to get out of the Treaty of Versailles? Well, just like France, Britain wants Germany to pay. Britain hasn't suffered as big a loss as France, but they still do want the Germans to pay. They don't want to have to cover themselves, the costs themselves, of course. But unlike France, Britain doesn't want to completely crush Germany. Britain wants to be able to trade with Germany in the future. In order for Britain to rebuild, it understands that it needs a Europe that has a strong economy, and Germany needs to play a key part in that. So while they do want the Germans to pay, they don't want to crush the Germans so much that Germany can't take place in the new economy that needs to help rebuild the whole of Europe. Britain, however, does want to dismantle the German military, particularly the Navy. Britain is always concerned about that naval enemy, and that is the area where it felt most threatened by Germany. And so Britain, as France does, wants to make sure that Germany cannot attack again anywhere in the near future. In the end, the British people want revenge, and Lloyd George is part of a democratic system. He's just been re-elected at the end of the war by the British people who want revenge on Germany, but at the same time he is cautious. He doesn't want to completely crush Germany. He needs Germany to rebuild, but to not be able to attack, and make sure that the Germans pay their way to cover the British losses. How about the Americans then? So these are Woodrow Wilson's ideals coming into the Treaty of Versailles, and as you can see, they're quite different to the British and the French positions. So first and foremost, Wilson is really pushing this idea of establishing a League of Nations. For him, this is the key to ongoing world peace, basically. This is to provide stability for the future, and it becomes a really important point that he pushes. In fact, there's criticism coming out of the Paris Peace Conference that too much time has been spent on the League of Nations and not on all of the other things that needed to be decided. America was fine to make Germany make some reparations, some payment, but was very keen to ensure that Germany could rebuild its economy and take place in the world market. Remember that free trade and a free market are very important components of the American ideology of the time. One of the other things that Wilson is pushing for is redrawing the borders of Europe, and allowing, we're going to have smaller countries now, but allowing for that self-determination by different ethnic nationalities. All of this should be familiar because this is coming out of his 14-point speech made in January 1918. He wants to establish strong democratic nations in Europe, and he wants them to have good trade economies because that's going to make America richer. In the end, however, Wilson is battling. He has these clear ideals of what he can see for the future of Europe. But as the war ends, he is battling back home with the US people who really want to return to a US isolationist policy where the US comes back just to the Americas and forgets about what's going on in Europe. And so Wilson has these ideals that he's pursuing, but is also battling against a changing attitude back at home. So that's the goals of the big three going in. And where's Germany? Well, Germany really is not a part of the negotiations. There is a delegation that comes in after the commencement of the peace conference, and they are shown the peace treaty for the first time on the 7th of May 1918. In other words, Germany didn't take part in any of the negotiations. They were just presented with the treaty as it had been negotiated by the Allied nations. Also, they really didn't get any chance to even alter any of the terms that they were shown in May. You've got to remember the position that Germany's in at the moment. They are under the threat of invasion. The Allies are saying to them, if you don't sign, we will invade you. This is after they've already started to dismantle the German army and navy, and of course the blockade is still in place. The Germans are in a very difficult position, and this cartoon on the right of your screen kind of reflects that difficult position that Germany is in. So the Treaty of Versailles is finished off, and it is signed on the 28th of June 1919. If you think about the number of nations involved, it's actually quite a quick process for negotiating a treaty of this size and breadth. It's signed in the Hall of Mirrors, in the Palace of Versailles, the place, remember, where the Germans had forced the French to sign the peace treaty at the end of the Franco-Prussian War, handing over reparations and Alsace-Lorraine. So here they are, the French are getting Alsace-Lorraine back. And this is a photo from that day where the Germans are forced to sign. Just a reminder that this Treaty of Versailles is about Germany only. There's actually another series of treaties which go on to be negotiated, which deal with the other Central Powers. For example, different places in Austria-Hungary, which of course is dismantled, Bulgaria, and the Ottoman Empire, which becomes disintegrated as well. I don't want to go into a lot of detail about the terms of the Treaty of Versailles. You can certainly read about those quite easily. Also, we don't need to have a deep reflection on them. That's not necessarily a part of what we're expected to do in this particular course, but it is important to have an understanding of what comes out of it and reflect on why these terms might be so harsh. So, of course, one of the most important clauses, really, even though it's clause 231, is that Germany has to take the blame for the war. Germany is basically having to sign to say, yes, it was our fault, we started the war, and therefore we have to pay for everything because we started it. So this war guilt, basically, clause is a key pivotal point of the Treaty of Versailles, which then justifies the Allies seeking all of the compensation that then follows. Territorially, the Germans are very much at a loss. Certainly all of their colonies have been taken off them in Africa and in the Pacific, but also on the mainland of Europe. Overall, about 13% of German territory is lost. And you can see some of the areas on the map here. A little bit in the north goes to Denmark. Over on what was the Western Front, of course, Alsace-Lorraine has gone. The Saar area, which is rich with coal fields, so it would have been a key economic provider for Germany, but that is taken off them and is actually put under the control of the League of Nations, this area. And then all of this Rhineland area is actually demilitarized, and Germany also has to pay quite a lot of reparations from any industry that is in that area. You can see there's another area here which actually goes across to Belgium. Over in the east, a large part of what had been Prussia or Germany is now given over to the brand new state of Poland. Okay, and then some of these port areas are now used to be part of Germany and now under the control of the League of Nations. So 13% of territory, and think about the number of, people who'd been living in that area. So millions of people who were actually German background were now living in brand new nations, including down here in the Sudetenland. Also, part of the Treaty of Versailles, of course, remember one of the key goals is to restrict Germany from ever becoming a mighty giant again Its army is reduced to 100,000 people. There's a ban on conscription. They're not allowed to build tanks or heavy artillery, not allowed to have an air force, not allowed to have submarines, and a very, very limited navy. So all of this is built into the Treaty of Versailles. Have a think about the way that that's going to impact on Germany and its ideas about itself as well. It also is expected to pay a huge reparations bill, $40 billion US. It certainly didn't have the money to pay that at the time, and in fact the debt has only recently been fully paid off within the last 5 years or so. And so they are crippling Germany with this reparations bill, as well as taking away territory and key areas that would have helped to rebuild Germany. Of course, the Treaty of Versailles also creates the League of Nations, which is nothing necessarily to do with Germany, but Wilson gets his way and the League of Nations is created. It does meet for the first time in Paris in January 1920. It then moves to Switzerland later that year, to Geneva. The interesting thing is that the US never signs the treaty to become a part of the League of Nations. This is because, I indicated before, the US is returning to an isolationist policy. So the interesting thing here is that this is Wilson's baby. It was his idea, not a bad idea, but the US themselves decide not to take a part in it. Might have something to do with how the League of Nations actually progresses in the next couple of decades. What do you think of the Treaty of Versailles? Have a think from a German side. What is going on here? How harsh it is. We don't have to actually be able to write about that, but it is important for moving on to the next national studies that we do, particularly if you're doing Russia or Germany, perhaps even Britain, to have an understanding of the impact of the Treaty of Versailles. And this cartoon kind of, sums it up. It's interesting. It's actually by an Australian cartoonist, Will Dyson, from the time 1919, and it's quite prophetic, really. So the tiger, remember the tiger is Clemenceau, the French Prime Minister, and he says, coming out of the negotiations, there's Wilson, there's Lloyd George in the background, he's saying, "Curious, I seem to hear a child weeping." And here are the children of 1940 weeping still over the peace treaty. 1940, of course, we're in World War II by that stage. And that is the end of our look at World War I.